Let's talk pressure groups. Let's talk about what pressure groups do and how they go about trying to do it. So the first thing to make clear is what they're trying to do is to change policy. And there's a number of ways in which one can try to change policy. You can try to influence policymakers directly, or you can try to influence those policymakers indirectly by mobilizing public opinion behind your cause. And if neither of those look likely to work, then what you can perhaps try to do is to challenge policy through the courts. Now, whatever your particular aim is, that's going to affect how you go about doing it. So if you're looking to influence policy makers directly, then obviously you need to go to the officials. If you want to mobilize the public, then you go through through media to the public, or perhaps to the public directly. And of course, if you're going to change policy through the courts, then obviously you're going to work on the legal system. So your pressure group activity, your pressure group will press on different places depending upon what their actual aim is. Are they looking to try to influence the people who are making the decision? Are they trying to influence the people who influence the people who make the decision? Or are they going to tackle it tangentially by going through an entirely different mechanism? Each of these is an equally valuable exercise, but the extent to which it will succeed will depend on a number of things. I mean, first of all, it depends upon an audit of your political capital. So in other words, you need to look at your pressure group and say, well, where are our strengths? What are our strengths? And maybe you've got stacks of cash. Well, that's going to take you in one direction. Maybe you have incredible access to government and the establishment, in which case you're going to go down one route and not another one. Maybe you have a huge amount of membership, or maybe the membership are very active and they've got nothing else to do. They're entirely dedicated to the cause. Maybe your particular cause is of strategic importance to the state, or perhaps the issue itself is very complicated or very emotive. All of these will determine exactly what it is you're going to do and how you're going to try to change policy in the direction that you want. Now, all of these are fairly straightforward, but where you really demonstrate understanding here is with the evidence. You need to have evidence, and you need to be able to show that a pressure group has a certain asset, and so they went in a particular direction, or rather, the reason a pressure group went in that particular direction was because of its political capital. So if you're looking to lobby officials, we need to think about what you need to do that and how you might then go about doing it. And again, think here about evidence. How can you bring evidence to bear on this? You need to think about your pet pressure group, those pressure groups we were looking at earlier, and see if you can put flesh on the bones. I'm not going to do that in this presentation. I can do it in class. And I will do it in class, but the value that follows in class, it comes from you bringing evidence to the table rather than me sitting there, while I hand out the evidence. You should try to find the evidence based upon your research, based upon what your pet pressure group does, and that's going to be a much more valuable exercise for you than sitting there waiting for me to come up with the ideas. Anyway, so if you're going to go lobbying officials, what do you need? Well, the first thing you need is access. If you're going to phone and they're not going to take your call, or if you're going to write and they're not going to respond to your letter, then frankly, you're wasting your time. And while everyone should get an equal hearing in this, we know perfectly well that if one pressure group phones a minister, he'll pick up the phone. If another one phones, he won't. So you need to work out which group you fall in. Are you inside? Are you outside? Why, when you phone, will the minister pick up the phone? It's also going to be useful if you have some cash at your disposal, because like it or not, cash does help with access. If you want to get the minister's ear perhaps first, you can make life more comfortable for him, and we'll look at the various ways in which you can do that. You can fund their support staff, you can hire a researcher, you can make research available to them, or you can employ a professional lobbyist who will have existing ties to the establishment, and they can then reverse engineer your agenda in there. A lot of former ministers actually are employed as professional lobbyists, but they do cost money. But because they're former ministers, they have access that perhaps you simply as a press group don't. And finally, if you are of strategic importance, then if you call, the minister's going to take your phone. So think there about the arms industry, think there about farming industry, anything that's of strategic importance to the state, you're more likely to have your phone call answered when you make that call. So yeah, how you might do it, you might supply advisors or secretarial staff. You might fund an APPG. Now I mentioned those earlier, all party parliamentary groups. They don't have any funding. They are entirely reliant on handouts from other people. So if you can fund an APPG, then immediately you've got access, because what you're doing is you're funding a group of MPs to come together and talk about your particular issue. So have a look at what Reprieve does there. And again, Cycling makes use of APGs. In fact, all pressure groups nowadays make use of APGs because it's a very good way of ensuring the attention of any particular member of parliament. You can also coordinate grassroots lobbying. You can organise a campaign of letter writing or emailing to MPs, to significant MPs, and that way you might be able to change the way the MP thinks if he's swamped by a deluge of mail from constituents and other areas. You can also exploit consultative democracy. We talked about that earlier. And if you have the mechanism to get yourself invited into these consultations, then obviously you will be able to influence opinion there. And of course, your strategic importance in terms of what you're bringing to the table is going to affect the way in which you, or the extent to which you might be able to exploit consultative democracy. Indeed, all of these are going to determine your ability to exploit consultative democracy, but we'll explore how that actually works in practice in class. So that's lobbying officials. Now, there's a fantastic BBC program which is linked on the internet, on the intranet, and I'll make sure that you get a copy of that, or we'll have some links to that later in this particular presentation. So that's lobbying officials. Alternatively, you could decide to go straight to the public. And again, what do you need? How might you do it? Well, you need an active membership. There's nothing more embarrassing than a march where nobody turns up. Alternatively, if you're going to come for some sort of publicity stunt, and this is where Fathers for Justice, yes, I hate them, but they did deliver the publicity stunt extraordinarily well. And also these guys who climb up power stations and unveil banners and paint slogans on chimneys. You need activists who aren't afraid to be arrested. So they need time on their hands and a sort of job that won't be lost if they're arrested. You also need a simple story. If you're going to the public, your story had better be understandable by the public, which is one of the reasons why the EU campaign hasn't really generated any great momentum yet, one way or the other, because these are very, very complicated issues. And by and large, the general public struggle to get their head around the complexity of the EU and the way in which the EU interacts with our economy. And so most of the EU material we're seeing at the minute is being aimed at business, people who actually have a vested and direct interest in the EU issue. Things like the environment, that's again somewhere where perhaps it's easy to go to the public. And you can see in the background there, cut Trident, save 100 billion. That's a pretty simple story. Of course, it's much more complicated than that. But the simpler the story, the more likely it is that your taking it to the public is going to succeed. Of course, it won't hurt if you have media skills. You know, nowadays, once upon a time, protesting was all about making banners. Now it's about exploiting the media. You can do that either directly yourself through the internet, or you can exploit the many, many opportunities that there are to get on TV or somebody else's website. But that will require skills. And in fact, a lot of what we find, a lot of this business in going public, it looks simple, but it can go horribly wrong. And so you need to make sure before you undertake a public campaign that you know what you're doing. Marches and protests, as I said, you need those members. It's very, very silly if you have a march and nobody turns up. Direct action, well, as I said earlier, you need someone who's prepared to take that direct action, who doesn't mind being arrested, who's not going to lose their job or their family if they find themselves serving some time at Her Majesty's pleasure. When it comes to media campaign, you might do it through a website, you might exploit existing members, but you really need those media skills. You need those media skills if you're going to fund a media campaign, because again, it can blow up in your face. All of these can. Marches and protests can blow up in your face if it goes wrong. Direct action can just make you look silly, as Fathers for Justice found out. And a media campaign that's half-baked is always going to backfire. So you need to know what you're doing if you're going to go public. The last action we looked at was see you in court and talk about expertise. You really need that expertise here if you're going to see somebody in court. And of course, it's the law, so you need money. How might you do it? Well, you can offer support in existing cases, or indeed you can seek judicial review yourself, which is, in other words, to start a particular case. So lots of different ways you can go about trying to influence public opinion. The success or failure of your campaign will depend upon matching your campaigns to assets. Did you choose the right approach? And of course, it depends upon the receptiveness of a target pressure point. So for example, if you fund a case that's fundamentally wrong, it doesn't matter how much money or energy you throw at it. If your client is guilty, then they're not going to get off. So you can't change legal facts. You can't perhaps try to persuade a minister that up is down. And so if you're trying to affect public policy, you better make sure that it's possible to affect it in the first place. Let's talk a little bit now about resources. Let's talk resources. In addition to all of the other things you've got, this is a fantastic program, Declared Interest, the Business of Politics. That is linked on the VLE. I will send you the link to that separately. Then you've got this, which is a fantastic program on tobacco. The manipulation of tobacco, the manipulation of tobacco policy is really an extraordinary case study as far as lobbying and pressure groups are concerned. And as is indeed anything to do with health, there's an awful lot of money involved in public health, and some of that is explored in this particular thing here. And both of these are explained on my Storify. If we go into the Storify, it's got links to these other things, and let's just go there right now. So here is the article on pressure groups. And you've got there the link to the tobacco lobby and indeed the conflicted medicine there. So yes, do please have a read of that. It should be very, very interesting indeed. And that is pretty much it for pressure groups. You've got to have the evidence. If you don't have the evidence, you're just going to find yourself waffling when it comes to pressure groups. So do make sure you've got that, and do come to me with your questions. There should be plenty. Speak soon.